Thomas Benjoe, President and CEO of FHQ Developments and current Chair of the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to speak with you again, and this time to actually interview you. So why don't we just begin and get right into it? How do you assess Indigenous business development in terms of its importance as a growth sector in the Saskatchewan and more broadly Canadian economy?
I think if we look at Indigenous business in general today, and if you're to look at the statistics, it's one of the fastest growing sectors in the Canadian economy. But I mean, the reason for that being is that Indigenous business has been left out of the movement of our economy, and so we're playing catch up. And through this phase of being able to catch up to the rest of the Canadian economy, there's really good opportunity to invest and support and to help us grow at an even greater exponential rate, because we know the effects of that success and what the economics will bring back for our communities. If we look at currently our 19 and under age group in Saskatchewan, 36.2% are Indigenous. So, we fast forward 10, 15, even 20 years, you're looking at 40% of the population being Indigenous. And so very, very important for us to start setting that foundation for future success and for our business community to be sure that they're preparing themselves for a future growing workforce that will become a key part of their business.
And I want to talk more about the youth. Of course, it's critically important when you talk about the future and the future economy included. But before, a sort of maybe an obvious question for you, but I think for many of our audience, it would be useful to understand, why is it important to focus on Indigenous livelihoods, business, wealth, prosperity, in order to achieve reconciliation? And what progress has Saskatchewan and its key stakeholders made on these points?
I think, we're just scratching the surface. A lot of the policies that we have today are that we've had in the past are just, starting out. And I think there's a tremendous amount of work that we still need to do to improve better policies, including procurement policies and trying to increase community benefit through some of that policy work. When I think about our own communities, there's a lot to be learned. I think from the business community, in the sense that our wealth, our view of wealth as an Indigenous community is very, very different. Our viewpoint of developing Indigenous wealth includes the community versus the individual. And so that means if we're going to build success, well, we're going to build success in the community around us. And I think that's an aspect that we sometimes forget about when we are building our businesses. We're looking for lowest costs. We're looking to establish a healthy bottom line. But inside some of that decision making, sometimes we forget about people. We forget about where we are. We forget about the community that's around us, that gives us great benefit, and we also forget about environment. And so I think with the introduction of more Indigenous value systems into the business processes and business decisions that we make long term, I think we're going to see a huge shift in how we assess success in business. And so continue to bring Indigenous voice and thought leadership to the table. And I think we'll do some really great things. I think, when you look at the changes that are being made and the new focus on ESG requirements, that's the buzzword of the day, right, is ESG. Had these organizations worked with Indigenous communities from the start and designed their businesses around introducing some of the value system and thought of Indigenous people into their processes, would we have made decisions differently? Would we have taken into deeper consideration ESG right from the start, rather than this just being a buzzword and a new way of investing or considering investments? It's something that should be best practice, and I think we could have learned that from Indigenous communities right from the start. Is we look at the economies before Western civilization being created within our territories. We were in balance. Our economies were vast. We had great trade, and we always had respect for our environment and the relationships and kinship that we had with not only other people, but with all walks of life. And so, you start to bring some of that into the way that we make decisions about investments today and ESG and Indigenous thought, I think is on a whole other level that eventually ESG will get to.
So, if we focus a bit more on Indigenous youth specifically, what do you think Saskatchewan and Canada as a whole need to do to better engage Indigenous youth and to achieve more of their participation in the economy? Because, as you pointed out earlier, it's essential. It's almost statistically, imperative. And what impact do you expect that to have on the future economy?
I think, if we always put youth first in our decision making, and we always think about, well, what's the future generation of our existence going to look like? We really need to invest in our youth. I mean, we look at the way that from a policy and a managing education perspective. It's typically our education systems that are the first to be cut. And I think only until this past year, through a pandemic, have we actually seen some fairly significant advances in how we teach. We were forced to. And so now we're at a point where we need to decide on, well, how can we do better? How do we take what we've learned during this past year and how do we advance the learning of our youth? We see, more and more of our youth have access to technology. I think we see a much bigger demand for access to internet. And, we have to really make those investments, and we have to go back and think about our traditional education models and make a decision on how can we do this and prepare our youth for the future. And I think those are some of the things that we've been focused on as an organization. We absolutely think about our youth, and we invest in STEM events and learning for the youth from our communities. We focus on entrepreneurship. We're focusing on a lot of things that help to develop our youth because we want to ensure that they're thinking about their future careers with us, and that we are being intentional in how we select our partners and intentional on how we talk about capacity building with our partners, just so that we do have a plan in place. And when we look at some of the business community today, when they talk about developing their future workforce, they're looking at post-secondary institutions. And what we're saying is, well, you have to go a little further back now. You got to build that brand awareness with those youth so that they have an actual interest in your industry. And if you're not capturing them young, you're going to have a much more limited net to be able to cast for your future workforce. So you start early. I think you'll be able to see greater success in the future.
You were recently sworn in as chair of the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce. Congratulations. But there are a few important points here too. I think you are the second Indigenous chair of the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, and that's also the second for Canada for any Chamber of Commerce. And I believe you're probably also the youngest. So that's really, really exciting. It says a lot about Saskatchewan and about I suppose, the leadership of the chamber. What are going to be your priorities? I mean, you kind of you have a lot of responsibility now and an opportunity, I suppose, to make a big difference.
A lot of our priorities are attested to our board, and we've actually gone through and spent a great deal of time on developing a new strategic plan. I have to give kudos to our previous two chairs that have started the process, and now it's full implementation of the plan on with me coming into the role. And I think some of the other things that we will be focused on, one is the procurement aspect within Saskatchewan, and making sure that we better understand community benefit and expand what community benefit actually means, so that when we are looking at, because we have crown corporations in Saskatchewan, we have our government ministries, and we've made, obviously through pandemic, we've made commitments to additional spending. And so some of the things that we want to be focused on here is making sure that we're creating more benefit for our business community, in being able to um, bounce back, I guess, from the pandemic and what it's done to our business community. And so we're looking at things beyond that. It's not just about ensuring that there's Saskatchewan-based labor content, but ensuring that there's Indigenous content, women are included. What about our minority businesses that have been disproportionately affected? How do we ensure that we understand what some of the reinvestment may be happening from those Saskatchewan businesses back into the community? There's so many different things that we can measure in terms of creating greater economic impact overall through those procurement processes. One of the other major priorities, and I've been clear right from the start since I've joined the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, has always been to increase Indigenous engagement and to make sure that I'm helping to give voice to the Indigenous business community and its growth and expansion in the province, and helping to be in a position where we can have really uncomfortable conversations about the things that we think are barriers, and be able to work through those issues. Those are the things that really excite me, is taking on some of those challenges head on, and being able to come up with better solutions. And along that is some of our continued thought leadership on low carbon economy, and continuing to focus on our energy sector and its development, and move towards making investments and considerations around a low carbon economy. It's what's going to be coming in the future, and we have to make sure that we're in a good position to be able to offer resources and support and knowledge back to our business community on how we do that effectively.
Finally, I'd love to hear your message to non-Indigenous Saskatchewanites or Canadians about our future economy, about the inclusion of not just Indigenous people, but Indigenous views, as we just described throughout this conversation. What would you like to say to Canadians, again, non-Indigenous Canadians, in sort of 30 seconds or a minute, really, really kind of to the point?
I think I would say that we've spent a great many years using policy to exclude Indigenous people from being a part of our economies, from being able to see success, to now shifting that dynamic and saying, how can we be very intentional and specific, and be able to design policy that includes Indigenous people, that includes the prosperity? Because when we think about where we're going as a province and even as Canadians, uh, being able to bring Indigenous people along on that journey will not only help to benefit our economies, but it's going to help to benefit our thought and help to bring new voices to the table on how we make decisions more appropriately for a greater future.